You're listening to Smart Metals Radio from the Hard Assets Alliance.
Hello and welcome to the show with me, Andy Duncan, in London. Today, coming to us from Vancouver, my special guest is Bern Klein, who's the Executive Director of the Canadian Institute for Extractive Industries and Development. On today's show, we'll be discussing sustainable mining and the Global Mercury Project, which is a bid to help reduce the use of mercury in small-scale gold mining. Hello, Bern.
Hello. How are you?
Fantastic. Now, in countries like Brazil, Mongolia, China and India, there's lots of small-scale gold mining which gets carried out using lots of mercury. How are you trying to reduce this use of mercury around the world?
We're doing it primarily through education. In many cases, the small-scale gold miners, or artisanal gold miners, as I commonly refer to them, they're using mercury to recover gold. It creates something called an amalgam, which is a mixture of gold and mercury. But in doing so, they contaminate a lot of materials that they handle and mix the mercury with mercury, and then they end up burning the mercury so that they're left with a gold residue product. So there are some basic things that we train the artisanal miners to do that get them to use less mercury to start off, and to use it in a safer and more environmentally friendly manner. And their main motivation is that it saves them from purchasing as much mercury, and we also show them how to get more gold using other methods. And using those other methods, that gets them away from using mercury as well.
And what exactly is the effect of mercury on the environment? Does it just damage the miners themselves, or does it damage a wide area? And what kind of damage does it cause?
So mercury is a heavy metal. It's used by the miners as metallic mercury, which is the same form of mercury that dentists use when they produce amalgams for fillings, for example. When they mix it with the soils to draw the gold out of those soils, like river sands as an example, there's always a little bit of residual mercury left. And what it does is that the mercury oxidizes and it forms something called methyl mercury, which is an organic form of mercury. And that is readily taken up by organic species, and it gets into the food chain. And once it gets into mammals and fish, it bioaccumulates. When it gets into the food chain, it starts to affect our immune systems. And it's famous for symptoms such as Mad Hatter's disease. So people will become a little agitated and aggressive. It's also famous for causing Minamata disease, which causes defects in children born to people who are contaminated with mercury.
Now, I'm always amazed when dentists actually put mercury into our teeth, although they do tell us it's totally safe. Now, how successful has your project been to reduce this use of mercury worldwide?
That's a good question, because it's very tough to measure the outcomes and impacts. But my colleague, who basically brought me into this field to help him, is a Professor Marcelo Veiga, who's a Brazilian, and he's been working with artisanal miners for over 30 years. In some communities where he's been working, most recently in Ecuador, they've measured reductions in mercury usage by 30%. And in another community in Colombia, they've reduced mercury usage by 50%. So very significant reductions. But I think we also observe that in many places where artisanal miners have been trained, they're now using technologies that really minimize the exposure. So it's not only the amount of mercury that they're using, but they're minimizing their exposure. They're not burning it in their kitchens and inhaling the mercury vapors. Because they're handling it and they're using technologies called retorts, they're minimizing that the risk associated with exposure.
Yeah. Now, to an investor, a gold bar is just a gold bar, no matter how it's being created. Do you think investors should be concerned about this mercury problem, or is it just something for the mining community to be worried about?
Yeah, I do believe investors should be concerned with it. For a number of reasons. One, it's a poverty-driven activity. So, when we're looking at countries where there is significant artisanal mining, you don't necessarily want to take away the livelihood of the poorest of the poor. But at the same time, as investors, we recognize that artisanal mining is a significant producer of gold globally. I can't tell you the exact number, but a significant portion of the gold that is on the market comes through this type of activity. In many cases, gold coming from artisanal mining is used for laundering drug money. It can be being used for supporting civil wars. So, in much the same way that conflict diamonds were used, at least a portion of the gold coming from artisanal miners is used in the same way.
One of your other areas of interest is sustainable mining, which I assume is a wider kind of thing. Could you define sustainable mining for us?
That's also a very good question, because it's a controversial question. Mines themselves are not sustainable because inevitably we mine a resource until it's depleted, and so at some point a mine will cease to operate. But a mining sector is sustainable. For example, in a country like Canada, where we've had mining for well over 200 years taking place, and it's involved putting the governance in place that enables it, but at the same time putting in the controls related to health and safety, environment. What we've done is we've created a sector and a climate for investment to continue to develop new mining projects, such as mines close down, new mines are starting up. So it's when I talk about sustainable mining, it's about looking at the sustainability of the sector.
And if Canada is a role model for sustainable mining, are there any naughty people out there, naughty countries who aren't very sustainable?
Well, when you look at mining in general, there's a pretty negative history that mining has had in all countries of the world. We became very concerned with the environmental practices over the past 25 years. And most recently, we've become involved with more of the social and community issues associated with mining as well. Many mining companies are transforming their practices, but that's not necessarily the case in all countries of the world. So when you look at developing countries, you'll often see that there are two standards of practice. There is a standard of practice of a domestic sector, which has not been compelled to transform. And then there might be a practice of international operations who are operating at using best practices and best standards. So I don't want to pick on a country. Canada is no better than any other in terms of our legacy and history that we've had to deal with. We've learned from that and we've built off of it. But there certainly is practices taking place in many countries of the world that are not acceptable.
Now, we've heard about gold, but are there any kinds of commodities which are particularly bad for this kind of thing, such as maybe rare earth minerals?
Well, to varying extents. When you talk about gold, the issue is the use of mercury in particular. When you talk about rare earth elements, the issues are related to perhaps contaminating rivers with silts and sands, but it's also the health and safety issues for the miners themselves. These are often unskilled workers developing mines in a very unsafe manner, working underground. Tens of thousands of artisanal miners in a broad range of sectors from gold to rare earth die in collapsed underground mines that they haven't built properly. So, from a health and safety perspective, it's a huge issue.
Now, lots of our listeners are mining investors. If they want to make sure that they're investing in the kinds of companies that you like, what kinds of things should they look out for before they invest in any mining operations?
Well, I would say that if they are looking at the company, most companies today will have sustainability reports, and they should review those reports. And within those reports, they should look for information about how are the companies interacting with the local communities in particular. That's where most of the conflicts are today. And if they have good relationships with those local communities, that suggests that they put a lot of effort into developing those relationships and to ensuring that those local communities are benefiting from the activities associated with the mining developments.
Okay, well, it's been great speaking with you tonight, Bern. How can our listeners find out more about your institute and find out more about your work?
Well, we have a website, which is www.ciieid.org, which stands for Canadian International Institute for Extractive Industries and Development. And there they'll find many articles about the Institute, about the work we're doing with artisanal mining, as well as other activities that relate to social issues associated with the mining sector.
Well, thank you very much for your time today, Bern Klein.
Yes, thank you very much.
Subscribe to the Smart Metals Radio Show on iTunes. You can also visit us online at hardassets.com/radio, where you can subscribe to our free mailing list and receive our free Smart Metals newsletter. For anyone who wants to set up an account with the Hard Assets Alliance, as a special offer, we shall be waiving opening and setting up fees. Listeners who'd like to speak to a live rep to walk through the registration process can call 1-877-727-7387. That's 1-877-727-7387. I'd like to thank Bern Klein for joining us on today's show, and I'd like to thank you too for listening. Until next time, goodbye.